It's now my privilege to introduce our next two speakers, Dr. Gojun Bu and Dr. Shane Shapiro. Together, they represent the leadership team of regenerative medicine on our Florida campus. Dr. Bu is a renowned neuroscience researcher and the Jorge and Leslie Bacardi Associate Director of the Center for Regenerative Medicine. Dr. Shapiro is a consultant in orthopedic surgery, and he's the medical director for regenerative medicine on this campus. Together, they're going to tell us about the current state of regenerative medicine and predict what will happen in the future in this area. Dr. Bu will begin, and Dr. Shapiro will follow. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you and welcome. Good morning again. So I'm named Gojun Bu, and by origin I'm from mainland China, but I spent most of my life in this country starting graduate school. I was recruited to Mayo Clinic 7.5 years ago. Prior to that, I was at Washington University in St. Louis. That was for 20 years. For the first 5 years, they called me a new recruit. Last couple of years, and one of our own. So my expertise is in Alzheimer's disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and therefore regenerative medicine is very relevant to me because, as you know, our body has a way of sort of regenerating, and think about, let's say, if you have a haircut, you grow back, right? If you have a liver damage, for most of the time, they can regenerate. But most of your brain cells don't, in particular neurons, right? Once they degenerate, they don't have the ability to regenerate, except for a tiny part of the brain. So that's very relevant to me, thinking about future medicine. What do we do with that? So I'm going to tell you a little bit of how we're going to do that in the future. And the last talk, we'll talk about the medicine in 30 years. And I hope our approaches along the way will be, gradual, but very robust. So let's begin. The mission of Center for Regenerative Medicine is to discover, validate, and deliver regenerative therapy guided by rigorous science. That's very important to us, rigorous science, and advanced technology to establish Mayo Clinic as trusted destination for regenerative medicine and surgery. Now, trusted destination is also very important because there are probably a lot of hypes out there. You heard stem cell can do this and that, but we depend on science. And that's the three-shield sort of unique combo at Mayo Clinic because we don't do anything. There's no scientific proof from research discovery to clinical research translating to clinical trials. Only when it's safe and effective, we give it to patients. So that's very important to keep in mind. There are a lot of wordings in this slide, but really regenerative therapy is to rebuild and restore health. Okay, and that's very important because the current medicine, the traditional medicine, is fighting disease. So if we have an infection, we try to fight it off with antibiotic and so on. But in conditions where we don't have a way to treat the diseases, such as neurodegenerative disease, we got to think about how we're going to regenerate. And either taking advantage of the body's own ability to do that, or using really so-called stem cell technology, which I'll tell you about. So at Mayo Clinic, we define regenerative therapy as regenerate, think about organ transplant. And we have one of the biggest operations around the country for our transplant department. Restore the function, repair the damage, and recover. Mayo Clinic, we use cellular products. These are mostly stem cell products, but there are other cellular products. For example, cells that we can treat cancer as well, and also non-cellular products. Some of these are biomaterials. We're conducting many clinical trials, over 100 of them. Some of them initiated in Mayo Clinic, others we participate. And I actually just came back from Japan Sunday night, midnight, and so I still have a little jet lag. And the reason I was in Japan is that we visited Kyoto University and Osaka University. Okay? And those are the two leading universities who have developed this technology, which I'll tell you about, that now it's called induced pluripotent stem cell derived from the adult tissue, that we do not need or rely on the embryonic stem cell. And Kyoto University, they have established clinical grade adult stem cells, so this can be treated for different neurodegenerative diseases. In fact, one of the latest clinical trials they're doing is Parkinson's disease. Okay. So that academic collaboration, industry partnership, and government entity is very important to Mayo Clinic. This is really 1 minute education about what is stem cell, okay? And so stem cell, probably most of us know about stem cell as embryonic stem cell. So, all of us came from one fertilized egg, so to say. And in the early stage of division, that one cell become 2 and 4 and 8, these cells have potential to become any part of a cell in your body. Okay, so those are called the pluripotent stem cell, and they're defined as these cells have unlimited ability to self-renew. Okay, so they can one become 2, 2 become 4, and so on. So if we make this in the clinical laboratory, we can make billions of cells. Meaning that we can make a body of cells. So that's one definition. The other definition of pluripotent stem cell is that this cell, because of the nature of the pluripotency, can become any type of cell in your body. Think about muscle, think about the heart, think about the hair, think about the brain, any part of the cells in your body. Okay? So I mentioned that now we don't depend on the embryonic stem cell. We use induced or adult stem cell. And I'll tell you again later on. There's another category of stem cell. It's called tissue stem cell. Okay, so these stem cells exist in your body as we speak. Okay, so not just the babies or young people, but every one of us have these tissue stem cells. So, and that include, for example, in your bloodstream, there are stem cells that can become different type of the blood cell. There are cells in your brain, actually they call neuronal stem cell, in the limited area in your brain. Those cells can only become the cells in that particular tissue, but not necessarily cells in other part of your body. So in the laboratory, either research or clinical setting, what do we do with these cells? So in research part, we use them primarily for disease modeling. So if somebody carry, let's say, a genetic mutation or genetic variant, we want to take these stem cells and make them to the tissue cells in the laboratory to see what happened to these cells. Do they make too much certain molecules or protein, or they produce harmful protein? And how do we find a way to eliminate that problem? And that is drug screening and testing. But related to regenerative therapy, these cells will also allow us to do clinical application, either now or in the future, rejuvenation or replacement therapy. So this is the thing that I was going to tell you about, that now we don't need embryonic stem cell, not at all. So I can take a cell from any one of you, either a tiny piece of skin or a little bit of blood cell. Okay, I can take that cell in my laboratory, okay, across the street in the research building called Birdsall Building. We have a regeneration lab. And we can reprogram these cells. And in this diagram, it shows patient skin biopsy, reprogram them with a few DNA factors. And now we make them so-called iPSC, induced pluripotent stem cell. Okay, so this technology was discovered by Dr. Yamanaka from Kyoto University, we just visited, and now is really robust, is well applied in the medical research field, and now we're exploring to establish this as a clinical grade iPSC. Why do we do that? If you look at the two circles on the right-hand side, if the patient has a known genetic mutation that cause certain diseases, and that including early onset form of Alzheimer's disease we study, there is a way we can do gene editing. Okay, this technology rapidly evolving, so that one single DNA codon problem, defect, we can correct that gene mutation. And now when you correct the gene mutation, the cells that produce from these iPSC become healthy cells. Okay. And think about now these healthy cells, if they're healthy neuron, we can transplant them back to the brain in the neurodegenerative condition. Okay, I mentioned about the Parkinson's disease, a degenerative disease of dopaminergic neuron, and Kyoto University is doing the clinical trial that we're either going to adopt the technology or collaborate with these scientists. On the left-hand side, if you do not do gene editing, or the patient does not have a known gene mutation, we probably have drugs, either already discovered or in the process of screening, and this drug can take care of the problem what is related to the condition. For example, Alzheimer's disease, people have this so-called sticky protein that form amyloid plaque. It's like a garbage piled up in the brain. And there's a way we have medicine to reduce the production of these sticky protein. And that if we implant that back to the brain with the cells that derive from the iPSC, that can solve the problem of neurodegeneration. So these are kind of current and future. It's probably going to take many years to do the proper research, do the clinical testing first, make sure it's safe, and then try this in different degenerative conditions. So there are a lot of promises, I said already. Regenerative medicine is potential to repair, replace cells and tissue damaged by injury, disease, or aging. There's a wide range of technology, including engineering cells. So how do we engineer cells? So cells, for example, has reduced ability to perform certain function. Now we can introduce or restore the function of those cells. Or we can engineer, for example, T cell in the immune system, so these cells have better ability to fight cancer. There's a clinical application called the CAR T cells to treat blood tumor or B-cell lymphoma. That's just approved by FDA, already been clinical applied in Rochester and moving down to Florida. So I mentioned about gene editing, replacement engineering, and there are many potential applications. So chronic diseases, acute injury, and or a genetic or congenital defect. I mentioned about a couple of conditions, but really the regenerative medicine is really applied to all areas of medicine. And if you look at this diagram, it's really spreading to every different aspect of the medicine that we deal with here at Mayo Clinic. We have a really comprehensive team. This is just not a complete list of the team here in Florida for Center for Regenerative Medicine. Dr. Shapiro is going to follow up to talk about the Regenerative Medicine Therapy Suite, and that's a point of care service that he leads. Dr. Abba Zubair is the leader for Human Cell Therapy Lab, and some of the stem cells I have talked about produced in this clinical laboratory setting, including so-called GMP facility, good manufacturing facility. We have scientists, we have program manager, but also importantly, we have regulatory support. So all the things we do in the clinic has to interact and be approved by FDA, Federal Drug Administration. We have biomedical ethics personnel and then legal support. So it's really a team dealing with every aspect of regenerative medicine. On this campus, we have what we call the 3 infrastructural platform. And the first one is so-called the Regenerative Medicine Therapy Suite, and I mentioned that Dr. Shapiro is going to tell you more about that. That's in the clinical building, that's in operation, and here at Mayo Clinic, Florida. The Human Cell Therapy Lab, this is again directed by Dr. Abba Zubair, and it has really a setting that we produce the stem cell. More recently with automation, and you see one of this machine in that middle diagram. We used to have to do this manually, culture cells in the so-called flask or culture dish, which in many days, in many flasks, it produce about 1 million cells. But now with this machine, we can produce about 1 billion cells. Okay, and think about it, that's 1,000 times more cells we can do manually. And that allows us really to do clinical trials in a more efficient fashion, so enough cells to treat multiple people. There are also cell-derived products that we categorize them as regenerative medicine products. This facility also supports investigative new drug, INDs, and design of clinical trials, as well as engineered cell products. I helped to run this facility called the Neuroregeneration Lab, and this takes advantage of the iPSC technology that I mentioned to you, and I'll tell you a little more in the coming slide. The Human Cell Therapy Lab, again, FDA very recently just cleared the way for Mayo Clinic to accelerate the production of stem cells for clinical trials through automation. And this was really very, very important to us because this is one of the few facilities in the country that's approved to do that. So I mentioned about some of the other things that's done in this Human Cell Therapy Lab. The little diagram you saw in there, this is a so-called CAR T cells. And I'll tell you a bit story about that. So the B-cell lymphoma is very difficult to treat because it affects your immune system. What this new technology does is that we can take the patient's own T cells, okay, and then re-engineer them to have a cell surface, what we call the chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR. This receptor will recognize an antigen on the tumor cell, okay, specific antigen called CD19. And that recognition alone, when these T cells, same patient T cell, put back in their body, they can just recognize those B cells and eat them up, basically. Okay, so very, very effective way. It's very, took many years to develop, but Mayo Clinic is one of the sites being approved for this particular application. I'll give you 2 examples of a clinical trial that's happening here at Mayo Clinic. One of this is really treat a condition after lung transplantation. So lung transplantation is one of the unique operations here at Mayo Clinic. Most people receive lung transplant doing really well, but some of them develop a condition called a BOS, and that condition really had the inflammation of small, airways in the lung. And these people, these lung transplant people, do not qualify for a secondary transplant. And that's primarily resulted from the inflammatory response, okay, because your body always has a tendency to recognize the transplanted lung as a foreign substance. And so the stem cell therapy, the idea is that the stem cell can modulate, or in this case, reduce inflammatory response. And so we conducted the first phase 1A trial showing that this stem cell that we put in the patient are safe. And we're ready to get launched the phase 1B/phase 2 trial to really test how effective this treatment would be for the lung transplant patient. The other trial we're going to launch very soon is to treat patients with hemorrhagic stroke. And this is a type of stroke that have a component of bleeding in the brain. Very difficult to treat. Many of the patients end up in intensive care for a period of time. The primary injury of the hemorrhagic stroke can be pretty severe, but really the injury is probably most severe from the secondary injury. And that secondary injury is from a systemic inflammation. Okay? So stem cell, as I mentioned, has a way to modulate the immune response. And so this, in the preclinical study, had proven to be very effective from Abba Zubair's lab. And now Dr. Abba Zubair and Dr. Muskie, our chair for neurology, going to team together and launch this trial very soon. So a few words about neuroregeneration lab. I mentioned that we can take a piece of skin. You can see that little diagram, the skin on the very left, start growing out cells. These cells are called the fibroblasts from the skin. Or we can take a few blood cells. They're called the PBMC blood cells. And reprogram them after 2 weeks or so, they become stem cell. And they're very recognizable because they form this clumps of cells very closely resemble what you see with embryonic stem cell. And that staining with the green color is really to prove that these have the marker, so-called, for as stem cell. With this facility, by doing this, we support drug discovery. We also support, as I mentioned, making clinical grade iPSC for eventual clinical application. We bank these cells from patient. So if some of you have, people you know coming to Mayo Clinic have unique condition, you might want to suggest people to participate in this clinical study. For example, again, my specialty is Alzheimer's disease. If we have more of these cells from Alzheimer's patient, we'll probably have better understanding what type of gene causes what kind of phenotype, and therefore we can correct that gene or correct that phenotype to eventually find cure for the disease. But these are the current lines we bank in the lab. Some of the technology we developed on the research side is really leading in the, I'll say in the nation or in the world. And this is one way, for example, we take those skin-derived fibroblasts and iPSC, we make neuron, and we make another cell type in the brain called the glial cells. In this case, they're called astrocytes, so that's red and green in this picture. If we mix them together, these two cells start doing what they do in the brain, and that is the neuron will start firing. They form connections called the synapse, and they do it so much better when those astrocytes, which are the green cells, are being around. Okay? And some of the genes related to disease are actually not necessarily neuronal genes. They're genes that express in the astrocyte. So this allows us to study really what genes driving what kind of pathway or phenotype, and if it's incorrect, we'll correct the problem. So this is really exciting. So now we can take a skin cell and make a small mini brain. Now think about it. This was unimaginable 5-10 years ago. Okay, we take a skin cell or a blood cell and make that piece a little mini brain. So if you look at that little dish, it has a ruler. That brain is about 3 or 4 millimeters. It's not the size of a full brain, but it has the brain structure, as you show in this green diagram, have layers of neurons. Okay, so without going through the detail, this technology took a long time to develop, but it really resembles how the brain is developed during the embryonic stage. So why do we do that? So we do that for two purposes. One is if the cells is from a patient with certain genetic mutation, we want to see how does it cause the problem. Connection between neuron or why neuron degenerate under aging condition. Two is this technology will eventually allow us to do replacement therapy. Okay, people when become severe stage of Alzheimer's, they lose about 1/3 of their brain, and most of these are neurons. If we have a way to have these cells become really brain cells, have a way to integrate with other cells in the brain, this is the way to do it. Okay, so we're very excited about this technology. And then this is a thing that we developing between the Center for Regenerative Medicine and Center for Individualized Medicine, what you just heard about. And that is we're going to build a bank of iPSC lines for clinical application, and they're based on HLA subtyping. Okay, so if you think about bone marrow transplant, some of you probably know there's a national registry, so you cannot just grab somebody and say, can you donate bone marrow for somebody else? They have to be matched. And that matching process are these so-called surface antigen HLA subtyping. Stem cell also have this issue, in particular if you use iPSC stem cell. So we're going to build a line of these, a library of these HLA subtyped stem cell using the so-called homozygous HLA homozygous subtype. So where we're going, just a couple more slides. I mentioned that at Mayo Clinic, everything we do here has to go through discovery, has to go through translation, clinical trial before we use for patient. And it's a long process. But because regenerative medicine is such a new medical field and is really represent the top of the pyramid of our care and more of tomorrow's medicine, we had to do a lot of this translation or clinical trial process. We have done, I wouldn't say enough, there's never enough discovery, but there's a lot of discovery for us to move to translation. And one thing that's exciting on the Florida campus is that we're building a new facility, new bigger GMP facility in the new building. One of the buildings on the campus that's going up is called the Discovery Innovation Building. The other building is called the Destination Medical Center. But this is in the Discovery Innovation Building on the 3rd floor. There will be a larger GMP facility manufacturing these stem cells. And therefore, Mayo Clinic Florida has been designated the hub for the entire Mayo Clinic. Okay, Rochester is bigger than us, but we're going to build this to supply cells to Rochester. So that's really exciting, and that's going to happen really soon. This is a diagram of the GMP facility. There are a lot of exciting components in this GMP facility. We're going to make not just tissue stem cells, and also eventually the iPSC stem cell that can really derive, make any cell type in the body. This is the way we're going to do it. We're going to have product and services on the left-hand side, and we're going to serve this to all the Mayo Clinic campuses, commercial entities, and other medical centers. I want to leave to you this last slide. And this really last slide is about, I think in the Chinese term, it's called yin and yang. Okay? And the yin part here is just really what we're doing now, which is very important in the Mayo Clinic, medicine of fighting diseases. Okay? We do whatever we can to treat diseases. But tomorrow, we want to add medicine of rebuilding health. Okay, so we all age, and but we want, aging process to be a healthy aging process. We want the diseases that are not treatable before, in particular degenerative diseases, to be treatable. Okay, and that's going to be driven by patients' unmet need. It will be by science of regenerative medicine, and then national, international collaborations. Thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bu. I'm Shane Shapiro. I'm the program director for our regenerative medicine therapy suites on the Florida campus here. And what, what the therapy suites are is really the front door of how we get these novel regenerative therapies to our patients. Dr. Bu nicely explained the different regenerative medicine platforms that we're working in Center for Regenerative Medicine. And so now we've got to figure out how to get these products into patients. Our new regenerative medicine therapeutic suites opened just over a year ago. They're in our Mayo building on the 3rd floor in the Center for Transplantation and Regenerative Care, and we have benefited tremendously from philanthropy over the years in Center for Regenerative Medicine. These therapy suites are very unique. They take advantage of what we're learning in the Center for Regenerative Medicine on how to deliver cells to patients to treat disease, and also how to process cells at the point of care on and the patient's own cells on a same-day basis. And what's unique about these two therapy suites is that they contain all the normal equipment that we would need to perform small surgical and medical procedures. But if you look through the very back of these procedure suites, you'll see that there's an open door to a cell processing area. And that is what allows us, through current regulations through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to process a patient's own cells on a same-day basis within the same surgery in a manner that is compliant with our current regulations. What we hope to do in the future is also use some of the cells that we are manufacturing here on our campus in our human cell therapy lab to also treat patients. Those are treatments that are coming in the future. We take a team-wise approach. I have a fantastic staff, medical technologist and nurse practitioner who help us perform all of these procedures. And yet, as we get very excited about everything that we're learning here with genomics and regenerative medicine, we understand that a lot of the hype is outpacing our science. We talk very much about the rigorous science that we adhere to here at Mayo Clinic, and yet elsewhere around the country and elsewhere around the world, we have a lot of direct-to-patient marketing of stem cell therapies that don't yet have the scientific basis for some of these claims. If we look at this map here, this shows you the earliest stages of these stem cell clinics that are out there pitching therapies to patients and how rapidly they have grown over the past couple of years, such that we've at this point blanketed the country with these clinics, more than 1,000 by last count in 2016. That's probably doubled over the last 2 years as well. We have these here in our own community, directly marketing therapies to patients for all sorts of diseases. You know, you've seen this in our presentations about our excitement being able to treat stroke and lung disease with cell therapies. But the problem is those are still in the earliest stages of clinical trials and not yet ready to be rolled out to patients as cures. And yet, when patients are being directly marketed to, this is what our patients are thinking, that we have cures using stem cells for some diseases that don't actually exist. This has even happened on our own campus. This was a flyer of a seminar by Physical Healthcare of Jacksonville. This happened in the spring last year here on our own campus using the Three Shields branded Mayo Clinic courtyard. And this company used the lobby of the Mayo Clinic courtyard to market stem cell therapies directly to our patients. Our patients come and think that they're coming to a Mayo Clinic seminar when in fact it had nothing to do with our institution at all. So very concerning, and yet what can we do about it? Because as you see the marketing here, stem cells now have become this all-purpose treatment where you can cure anything. If you look at the diseases listed here on this all-purpose elixir, but be careful, the disclaimer down at the bottom, multiple costly injections may be needed and results may vary. And the reason for that is that because we haven't proven that all of these treatments work just yet, these are not covered by insurance, and so patients are having to pay out of pocket for most of these therapies, and we don't yet know if they all work. So here in the Regenerative Medicine Therapies program, one of the most important things that we do, we call our Regenerative Medicine Consult Service. And this is embedded on all three campuses. And what we do is we consult with patients seeking regenerative therapies on what's real and what's not quite so real. We do this for every specialty that we have cell therapies for at this point. This includes orthopedics, dermatology, plastics, neurology, and gastroenterology. And patients come to us and and talk about what they've heard or what they've read on the internet, and we can help guide them through the science and what's standard of care to treat particular medical conditions and what clinical trials might be available to them at all three campuses. And so we have this philosophy in our therapy suites where if there's a cell therapy, whether it's now or whether it's next year or 5 years from now, that's already been proven, we are very quickly going to translate that and apply it into our clinical practice and offer it to our patients. If there's a product that has no human experience just yet, we have to design appropriate clinical trials. Now, that may not necessarily occur on our campus if it's happening on another Mayo Clinic campus or another academic institution around the country, but we're not going to go forward with any of these treatments until they've been adequately studied. Now, if some of these treatments are in the early phases of being studied, then we can go ahead, if they're safe and they're legal, we can go ahead and start using these therapies while at the same time continuing to study. And that's what we're doing in our therapy suites, is if we have an option for patients using stem cell therapies, we will do our best to offer it to patients while we're still studying it. The first of these is platelet-rich plasma. Many of you may have heard of this because this has been around for well over 10 years. We've been using this in our clinical practice for that long. And what it involves is taking a patient's own blood, using a centrifuge to separate the blood into its three components. The component that is most important to us are the platelets, and because platelets control all three phases of our body's healing cycle. And so if you have a torn tendon, we can a tendon that hasn't healed just yet, we can take platelets, inject them into the area of torn tendon, and restart that healing process. Again, we've been doing this for a number of years, and the outcomes are really quite good. These are studies that were conducted at Mayo Clinic in Rochester by colleagues of mine, showing an 83% satisfaction rate with pain relief, which is pretty good and better than a lot of current standard therapies that we would otherwise have for treating tendon conditions. We very quickly then moved into treating joint conditions. Osteoarthritis, or degenerative joint disease, is a problem that we cannot regenerate just yet. Cartilage, when it wears, it causes a painful joint condition, and we're trying to use cell therapies to regrow cartilage. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And so what we've started to do is use platelets and other therapies that we can inject into joints to help relieve pain. And what we've found is that in many cases, these treatments are superior to the standard of care that we have in terms of relieving pain for joint problems. Excuse me. So we're starting to see an opportunity to translate some of these therapies into our clinical practice right now. And the reason for that is that for a lot of clinical conditions, arthritis being one of them, we don't have great standard of cares. Dr. Bu talked about Alzheimer's, and we know about stroke and heart disease and other medical conditions that we're looking to regenerate or restore, but even if we can just offer patients other opportunities, other treatment options right now while we're still conducting these clinical trials, this is where the benefit's going to come in the early phases of our cell therapy program. If you look at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons' current recommendations for treating osteoarthritis, it's not very good. We talk about a little exercise, some over-the-counter pain relievers, and then the occasional injection. That's not great, and our patients come to us and they're seeking other options. They tell us you've got to come up with something more, and so that's what we're trying to do in our program. From the platelet-rich plasma, we transitioned to using stem cells. At its earliest phase, we can get stem cells from bone marrow, from a patient's own bone marrow, and there's not a lot of stem cells in the bone marrow because we're not culture expanding them. We're not growing them up in a lab. We take them from the patient on the same day. We concentrate it, much in the same way that we do with the platelets, and then we can directly inject them back into a patient's joint. We conducted the world's first clinical trial of this procedure that is being marketed to patients on a large scale. And what we found was that we're able to relieve pain in a number of these treatments. In this particular case, we used the knee joint, and patients did experience some pain relief. But we did an MRI scan before the patients got the procedure, and then we did an MRI scan 6 months later after the patients received the stem cell procedure, and we did not regrow any cartilage. And so what that means is we need to be careful when we're talking to our patients and the other individuals around the country that are marketing therapies to our patients. We need to be careful because we're not yet regrowing cartilage. We hope to be able to do it at some point in the future. But for now, we're still just treating symptoms. We're still just relieving pain. Fortunately, we know these procedures are safe. They've been performed many, many times, several thousand times having been reported in the literature. This is a colleague of mine at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Dr. Jay Smith, and when they surveyed several thousand patients that had this procedure, we're not seeing any adverse events. So that's very promising when it comes to these procedures that we're performing. Many of you may have also heard that we can also get stem cells from fat, and so we are starting to translate that into our clinical practice as well. Here's a procedure that we currently are offering, and this is an FDA-approved procedure where we perform a liposuction to take the fat from a patient's abdomen, and then we're able to concentrate it, just like we're able to concentrate the cells from bone marrow, and we can inject it back into the knee. And this is like a fat graft that patients will have in other medical specialties, such as plastic surgery. And patients are seeing a nice improvement in terms of their pain relief for osteoarthritis, but no new cartilage growth just yet, no cure for arthritis yet. We are studying this. Okay, these trials are going on currently at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and we hope to be studying stem cells from fat in the same way here on our Florida campus. And then what we've done in our cell therapies program is reach out and try and find partnerships in other medical specialties, because as we're learning about using same-day bone marrow, stem cells from bone marrow, or same-day stem cells from fat in our orthopedic practice, we're talking to our specialists around the campus and around the institution about what other diseases could we treat. And so these partnerships here, I'd like to highlight one. In our Department of Dermatology, we've started treating hair loss for both men and women. And for a number of patients, this can be a disabling condition. And much like osteoarthritis or heart disease or Alzheimer's, our current treatment is not that good. Patients don't like taking pills for this. They come with side effects. And patients don't like having to shampoo with Rogaine on a daily or twice daily basis for this problem. So they're coming to us and saying, what treatments do we have in regenerative medicine that could be better than what we already have? So we started a randomized controlled trial looking at using that same platelet-rich plasma that we use to treat tendon and joint disorders. Can it be used to help jumpstart hair growth again? We didn't just perform the procedure and show patients before and after pictures and ask them how they're doing. We subject this to rigorous science, and we digitally counted hairs and hair thickness using specialized software that is largely unavailable elsewhere around the country to measure hair regrowth. Our early results are quite good. Okay? Again, we are not curing baldness with these treatments. This is not a one-time treatment where you can come in and get a full head of hair. But these treatments, much like how we're controlling symptoms from arthritis, we can also control symptoms from hair loss and help patients regrow hair that is temporary But if we come up with these treatments as a maintenance therapy, many patients will tell us that they would prefer coming in once or twice a year to have a series of injections rather than having to take a daily pill or rather than have to shampoo with a medication on a daily basis. We are taking what we've learned from the hair loss and we're applying it to facial rejuvenation. This is being done in conjunction with our plastic surgery department and our dermatology department in our cosmetic center that is also newly opened. And we are also currently using cell therapies to treat non-healing wounds. Now, this is one example of where cell therapy has progressed over the years to a procedure that is insurance approved. And so this is a product that is available on the market that is FDA approved, and now we do actually have insurance coverage, Medicare coverage for this procedure. And so we hope that by applying rigorous science to these treatments, we will come up with the exact same type of therapies for these other diseases with unmet needs. I want to highlight, you've heard a number of different terms about stem cells. I talk about the same-day stem cells that we do in our regenerative medicine therapy suites. Dr. Boo talks about the stem cells that we can grow in our human cell therapy lab as well as our neuroregeneration lab. And it's important to recognize that what we're seeing out in the community around the country are really just applications of same-day, same procedure, same person stem cells. And to be honest, there aren't that many stem cells in these treatments. And so if you look at this bar graph here, this is the PRP on the far left, which was the blood product that I mentioned. That has no stem cells in it at all. The concentrated fat and the concentrated bone marrow that we do here and that is done elsewhere around the country, they have very small numbers of stem cells, upwards of around 100 to 500,000. And if we're truly going to harness the promise of regenerative medicine and stem cell therapy, we are going to have to amplify these stem cells many times over to deliver doses that will get us to the point where we can truly cure disease, and that will only come with rigorous science and rigorous testing. I mentioned the regenerative medicine consult service, how we educate our patients about these novel cell therapies. Another really incredibly important thing that we're doing is we're educating the workforce of the future. We have to get the new regenerative sciences into the hands of our newest scientists and newest physicians. So in the medical school, in our graduate school, in our school of continuous professional development, we are presenting and we are ingraining these concepts into those curricula. If you watch politics at all, you know that the future of regenerative medicine is happening fast. The 21st Century Cures Act was passed in late 2016, and this was supposed to provide easier access to stem cell therapies. It is written into law now, and the FDA is starting to make changes to help us with pathways that will speed these therapies to market once we are able to better delineate the science. Dr. Boo mentioned the team-wise approach that we have here with regulatory support, our human cell therapy lab, legal and ethical support, and the patients in the middle here, right? It's the needs of the patients come first. This is why we do all of this. So I hope I've gotten close to catching us up on time.